And we're back here once again with another episode of the MSK show, and this is going to be episode 153. And in this episode of the MSK show, I am going to be having a conversation with Douglas Ernst. What's up, man? How are you doing?
What's up? Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime, man. So, a lot of people don't actually know this when it comes to like setting up one-on-ones. We've actually planned on doing this for quite some time, but literally I totally forgot to actually schedule us to do a one-on-one because not only am I so insanely busy, it was around like the holiday time and everything. And I was like, man, I want to get Douglas in at a time where we could just have a full-blown conversation that doesn't end up having to be like condensed like an hour, just in case you were like really busy during the holiday season or before that. So everyone knows you as kind of like a prominent figure in like the indie comic book community, actually. But we'll get to all the juicy stuff, with iconic comics and your comic book series Soul Finder, which I may or may not have bought actually, or maybe I did. You guys got to watch my comic book hauls because I did happen to buy Common America, the omnibuses, and I did end up buying Soul Finder. So at some point, whenever I get the time, I will end up doing comic book reviews on every single book for Mr. Douglas's Soul Finder series, actually. Cool. Let's start here from the very beginning. So just in case you ever come on the show again, we won't have to do this again. How was your life growing up, actually?
My life growing up. So I basically lived I sort of like liken it to The Sandlot or The Goonies, like those sorts of movies, the feel of it in terms of growing up in the 80s and be able, like, you basically went outside early in the morning and then maybe you might come back for lunch, but then you were out again. You might come in for dinner, but then you were out again. And then at a certain point when like the street lamps went off, then people started to having to go back and their moms would call them or whatever. But for the most part, you just went out and you went on adventures with your friends, and there was like creeks and cornfields where I lived, and we would just follow the creek as far as we can go, and we would wander through cornfields and all sorts of stuff like that. Went on all sorts of adventures. So, and then there was a lot of construction where I was living, and so we would go through like houses that were half built and into the foundations and all sorts of stuff, and we would bring our GI Joes and play on construction sites with GI Joes and all sorts of stuff like that.
Okay, so throughout your life, you went to public school, and you're a little bit older than me. I'm like old at this point. My back's thrown out at this point, as people know. If people don't know this, because a lot of kids nowadays have a different way they interact in school and interact in life, because life's progressed to a point where media is a lot more consumable. Back when you were going to school, were you ever picked on for being a nerd?
No, I wasn't. Not really. I mean, I was pretty athletic, so that always helped.
It definitely helps.
So, like, I was a smaller kid. I wasn't big by any means. Yeah. But if you were fast and you were good at sports, then for the most part, people would leave you alone. But then, obviously, in middle school, as you get older, there's people and groups that don't like each other, and people tend to pick on you. But for the most part, I don't know. I've just always been able to kind of set boundaries with people right away. And even bullies, for the most part, I didn't really have to deal with too many, except when they were like a year or two older and they're clearly much bigger than you and much older. That was a little bit of a problem at times in high school.
So after high school, did you go to college or anything, or you just chose to not go to college? You go to trade school, anything like that, or you just got married and had like 5 kids? And
no, I went into the military right out of high school.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I was in mechanized infantry for a few years, and I was overseas in Germany, and then I was in Macedonia, and went to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia. And I liked it a lot, but I knew I wanted to get married at some point in time. And I just saw a lot of guys that had a lot, like, it was very tough if you wanted to be married and you were in the infantry, because they were always either in the field or deployed somewhere. And I was like, I don't think that I would be able to have a healthy relationship, like always being in the field or deployed like 80% of the time. So I was like, all right, I'm going to get out. I'm going to go to school. And then if I want, I could always go back in. And so I got out and I wanted to go to University of Southern California, but then I realized it was way too expensive. So I really still I wanted to go either to NYU or USC or University of Chicago, and I was like, okay, well, I have the GI Bill, $33,000. I can go to a community college and transfer, and then I could work and save money, and then I should be able to, if I get into one of these schools, make it happen. So I worked the overnight shift at Target. I went to a community college. I transferred after a year and a half, and I got into the University of Southern California. And then I ended up meeting my future wife. And so return to the military didn't really happen. Actually, it almost happened years later after I got a master's degree. Moved out to Washington, D.C., went to American University, got my master's in political science. And then after that, I tried to actually go back into the Army, into intelligence. But I basically wanted to get all sorts of stuff in my contract because I was wiser now that I was older. And they were like, oh, you could only do that the first time you enlist, and you can't do that now. And I was like, well, I was a dumb kid when I was 18 years old, and I didn't know I can do this. So you can make it happen if you really want to. And they're like, oh, we'll get back to you. And then they never got back to me. And then it was sort of like a blessing in disguise. And so then I ended up working at a nonprofit, the Heritage Foundation, Washington, D.C., and I worked at the Washington Times as a reporter, journalist for a long time.
You were a journalist. Okay.
And then eventually I started doing the Soul Finder books, and they did well enough to where my wife was like, did you want to just do this like full time? Do you want to just leave the newspaper? And then I was like, are you serious? And she's like, yeah, I mean, why not? Like, give it a shot. And I was like, maybe. And then I got a new boss at the newspaper after like a decade roughly. And my new boss was a loser. I shouldn't say it like that. But my new boss wanted to micromanage me after I'd already been there for like a decade, doing quite well. And I was like, all right, I don't need to deal with this. I'm out. And I'm just going to go full in on Soul Finder and Iconic Comics. And so that's what I did.
So just to clarify, you live in Texas right now, right?
No, I actually live in Reno, Nevada, and I also spend time in Montana. Kind of like go back and forth between the two, but Iconic Comics is down in Texas.
Yes, okay.
And I will actually be in Texas this weekend for Anime Sunika, which is in Belton, roughly 45 minutes north of Austin.
Yeah, because people assumed since Iconic Comics is based out in Texas and you have a comic book series you do with them, people thought you lived in Texas. I was like, I don't think he does. You're on a PST time zone, which Texas is like what, 3 hours ahead of us? 2 hours ahead, I think, actually. Somewhere around like there.
2 hours ahead.
Certain area. Yeah.
I definitely spend time in Texas every year.
Yeah.
With Iconic Comics and going down, and Bell County Comic Con is in the summer, and I try to get down to see the guys. And so one of the main reasons I'm going down this weekend is to see Matt Weldon, who is the artist on the Soul Finder series since Timothy Lim was the artist in the first book, and then after that, Tim's got his whole stuff with Common America Black Ops, and he introduced me to Matt Weldon, and then Matt and I have been working on Soul Finder ever since.
So now we're going to get into comic books, actually. So what was the first comic book you had ever had? Was it a Marvel book, a DC book? Were you like on the Image Comics 90s boom?
Yeah, so I actually learned how to read on comic books. My oldest, I have two brothers, but my oldest brother basically used to sit me like on his lap or on we had this ugly green chair from the 70s. And he would read Spider-Man comic books to me. He would read Iron Man to me. Those are the main two. My other brother's a big Daredevil guy, so he introduced me to Daredevil. But for the most part, it was The Amazing Spider-Man is what I essentially learned to read on. But I also liked Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, and this was in the early mid 80s.
So after that, did you keep up with comic books throughout your life, or you rediscovered them later on? Because I know a lot of people could have varying different comic book origins. They'll like discover them, keep up with them, fall off at one point, then come back. What was yours?
No, I've been reading comic books my entire life, and I read them. So with the Clone Saga.
Oh, the good old Ben Reilly. It's always the Clone Saga that makes people get off back in the
I
day.
actually did. I end up dropping for a short amount of time, for like 2 years. I dropped. I got away from comic books, and it was weird because even though I wasn't reading, I would still randomly go to the comic shop here and there, but I was not really collecting for like roughly 2 years. And then when I went into the military, then I was getting a nice paycheck, for the first time in my life. And so I was like, ooh, I could get a subscription. And then I was in Germany, so I got a subscription to Marvel Books. And then they actually had some on the base in the little shop there or whatever. You would get comics here and there. So it was nice to get comic books over in Germany. So I picked it up then. And then when I got out and I was going to school, I had saved up a bunch of money. So I had plenty of money for comic books. I kept buying them, but I always stuck to Spider-Man, Iron Man, Daredevil off and on. But Spider-Man and Iron Man were the two that I really liked. And I only stopped. Well, then I stopped with One More Day and the deal with the quote unquote devil, essentially.
J. Michael Straczynski run on Spider-Man.
Yeah, I stopped for like another year and a half, 2 years. And then my brother had read some issue with Zeb Wells. I think it was like Lizard was in it. And he was like, hey, no, you should check it out again or whatever. So I was like, all right, let me see what's up. And then I ended up getting back into them, but I still was not really happy. And then the comics just got, they just got so bad that, and then I got involved with Soul Finder and doing the Iconic Comic stuff that I really have not paid too much attention to Marvel these days. I will keep tabs. So they recently had like Gang Wars and Spider-Man, and I checked out a little bit of that, but I was still like, this is not good.
Yeah. So for me, with Spider-Man comics, we didn't have a comic shop around us when we were growing up. This is an interesting city, let's just say. So we only got Spider-Man comics, or just comics in general, when my mom had a newspaper subscription. So we get them like once a week. This was back when like Spider-Man 3 was about to come out, and movie theaters would, Tobey Maguire Spider-Man was huge back in the early 2000s when that trilogy was picking up steam. And at a certain while, she couldn't pay for the newspaper subscription anymore, so we not getting Spider-Man comics anymore. So that was the only comic character I really had comics for, because the first thing comic-wise I ever owned was remember that original little black Marvel encyclopedia for Spider-Man and his villains? That was my very first comic book anything. It was an encyclopedia for Marvel, for Spider-Man's villains, a little small black book. And then when I went to a library, it goes back in like 6th, 7th grade, I got the bigger one. I was like, oh my God, there's so much Spider-Man I don't know. I learned about Spider-Man 2099, Venom, all these like other characters that were just involved with Spider-Man at that moment in time. And it's comic books, for us growing up, manga was more accessible and just more cheaper. It was only like $10 for what? 5 chapters, whole complete book. So when I got older, just like yourself, whenever I had money, I bought, as people can see, I bought a lot of comic books, actually. I have comic books in certain areas of my house that I've not even opened yet, just packages of books stacked. So for me, that's what happened. Yeah, I got older. I was able to just, get more books. But I tell people this, I didn't really want to read the stories online. It was just the only way I was ever even able to keep up, because we were poor. Not really much you could do at that point, But it's weird because a lot of people will read stories online, but they never grasp the full story of the book, though. Because you could go online on Wikipedia and read about a character interaction or a book, right? You read the whole story if you want to, but you never really get the full grasp of the book unless you actually literally read it yourself. And for people to say certain things like, oh, I have no way of accessing the story. Literally, if you want to pirate the damn books, I'll tell you to do it, because at least you'll have a better understanding of what you're actually talking about. People that talk about comic books, you can tell when someone's a poser. It's very easy. Like when someone says some absolute bullshit, it's not true, because you'll go like, wait a minute, I read that. That's not true. Like people will post like out of context comic book panels, like of Captain America's, then Captain America 4 is coming out in about a few days, right? People say, well, Captain America would never do this. Granted, if you've never read that story, how would you know the context of what that panel even means? Posting a panel means nothing if you don't know the context behind the story about the book, what that writer was intending for that story. Posting an out of context panel just automatically tells people you were probably some poser. Like the whole female Silver Surfer one. People are like, oh yeah, female Silver Surfer's in the comics. Yeah, the character with one panel, one page, and no one knows who that character is. All of us had to look her up because we didn't care. All we know is Norman Rad is Silver Surfer. It's like, yeah, guys, certain things are in comics, but that doesn't mean that they just are always good and the fans always like it. What is this common sentiment where people go like, oh, it was in the comic books, so that means it was just regarded as a good idea and it was always well accepted. It's like, no, comic books have varying different ways of how people kind of receive them. Like the whole One More Day, guys, that's in the comic books where Peter makes that deal with Mephisto to ruin his life. Yeah, no one likes that. And if someone does like that, their opinion probably don't mean shit to a lot of people. But if that's in the comic books, does that make it good? No. It's just, I don't know where people get that sentiment because it was in a comic book that automatically must make it good. It's like, no, comics have very weirdly bad ideas, obviously. You know, Cyberfrog. Oh, sorry. I just cough and laugh there. But I want to ask you this about Iconic Comics, actually, because you work with the guy who runs it is Tim Lim, actually, or he does Comic America.
Well, Tim doesn't run Iconic Comics, so that's a whole other. There's like inside jokes where I'm the secret president of Iconic, or sometimes people think Tim runs it. Like Tim and I and Mark Pellegrini were there from like the ground level, but there is actually somebody else who runs, like one of our friends, who's an entrepreneur who has like multiple businesses. But he is actually, and he's the one who puts on Bell County Comic Con. He's actually the guy who runs Iconic Comics. But in terms of Tim, in his ideas and his vision, Iconic is very much in line with, you know, what Tim believes indie comics should be and represent and strive towards.
I actually heard about you guys back in 2023 when I had Tyler Draw and Talk on. He was like, have you ever heard of Iconic Comics? And I was like, no. And he said, just type in Iconic Comics or look them up. And I was like, huh. So it seems like they're well put together. Seems like they deliver books on time. Because, you know, you like to generally see if someone can deliver books too. Because, you know, so sometimes for websites, people don't really look at reviews because they feel like they're like bought and paid for. They're like they're bots, whatever. I usually always look at reviews generally most of the time to see like, okay, is everything coming out fine? Is there any issues here? And it's like, I read everything. People are like, yeah, I get the books. They come out on time. I'm like, oh, okay, good. Because, you know, with any comic books, the thing that I always thought going into it, if I would buy them, is like, is there a chance this person can fulfill the book? Because that's always going to be a thing in the back of someone's head because of, you know, all the crowdfunding, you know, issues that have happened in years ago. If you guys don't know, Rob Liefeld, the guy who created Deadpool, he had a crowdfunder that he had. Still's not fulfilled. Actually, it's like 10 years. It's like 8 to 10 years unfulfilled. Because the reason why I think people, for the most part, always will trust Marvel, DC, Image, and Dark Horse on those people, because they know at least the books aren't going to be good sometimes. They'll at least come. They'll at least come out at some point. And people always get this wrong too. There is delays in the mainstream. There is, but they're not like years late. At most, it'll be like 6 months at the most. But it's usually things come out on time or they're delayed by like a few weeks, give or take like shipments and stuff like that. So, because I know you talk about this on Twitter a lot, your main standard for how you want to run in Iconic Comics as a vision you have is making sure books come out on time, because people do this thing online, you know, the usual suspects, where they're like, you know what, it'll just take years for me to do a book, and that makes it more quality. Okay, so I will always tell people this: if a book comes out more quality years late, why did legendary iconic stories you yourself love come out on time,
right,
and they came out quality? I'll just use an example: Batman: The Long Halloween, which is regarded as one of the best Batman stories ever written by Mr. Jeff Loeb and done by art by Tim Sale. That came out on time. That didn't take 10 years to make. Okay. There's so many stories you could just name off the top of your head. Judas Contract from Teen Titans, many prominent Spider-Man stories, you know, throughout the history of Spider-Man comics, you know. Clone Saga, well, obviously wasn't good for a lot of people. Did come out on time though. You weren't waiting for the books. You know, I don't know where this notion is that if you wait for a book, something that just makes it better. Guys, how many times have you waited for a movie to come out? Let's use Captain America 4. It's coming out in a few days, right? How many times has that movie been delayed? Doesn't look like that's coming out in quality anytime soon. You know, I don't know where that comes from. Like, where does that mindset even come from? That's just stupid. That's just someone who wants to be lazy and doesn't want to get shit done. That's just literally how that works, you know? But I want to hear your opinion on it, about that. The whole waiting for a book for 4 or 5 years means it's going to be quality. It's like, I just don't see it. I think it's a terrible argument, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that stinks about indie comics is it's such a small space in terms of creators that anytime you're talking about the industry, even if it broad brushstrokes about the industry, and even if you're not singling individuals out, they take offense to that. So if you, even this subject right now, people are going to be get all upset about it. But it's like, I feel like I should be able to speak upon sound business practices in indie comics
Mhm,
if it affects not only myself but other creators
mhm.
and obviously the backers and the readers who are getting the books without people taking offense and saying, "Well, you shouldn't be able to talk about that." But in my mind, it's a false dichotomy to say that you could only have quality or quantity. And I've always said that there's a happy medium, and also the creator is the one that sets the expectations. So with my books, I basically have been going about like one book every year and change, or maybe a book and maybe a short story. And so people expect, okay, well, that's what he's capable of doing with his life or whatever. Tim and Mark putting out 3 books a year, like 2 Common Americas and a Black Ops. The Kindred Heavens guys have been basically doing like a book a year. So you could just keep Alejandro Mirabal. He's only just coming out with Long Harbor 2 and the sometimes like he's working on it now, but it was years ago when he did 1. So Sven with Butch Killigan, he's been doing like a book a year or whatever, and he just came on like last year, so now he's already working on volume 3 of his book. Arc Athena, Eric Canetti, same thing, a book a year. So the creator sets the expectations, and in my mind, the reader will give you a grace period. So they're like, okay, well, he got sick, or his mom got sick, or who knows, he broke his leg. Okay, we're going to give him a couple months grace period, and that makes sense. But if you set the expectation that it will be out next year, and then suddenly 2, 3, 4, 5 years go by, you're Rob, and it's a decade later, you have not. That's unacceptable. And as a reader, I would think like you would be annoyed, like this guy just thinks I'm a doormat, and I'm just, or as a piggy bank, and I'm here to give him money, and then he'll just he's like some godlike figure, and he's like, oh, whenever I decide you're gonna get the book, that's when you'll get it. So you just shut up and like it, sort of thing. So I always put myself, I started out as a reader, and my heart is always with the reader, it's always with the consumer. So I try to put myself in their shoes, like how are they going to perceive my actions? Is it going to be disrespectful to them, or can they see that I'm putting forth a good faith effort to do right by them? And people, if they see that you are trying your best to do right by them, they are very forgiving, and they will work with you, and they will be there for you if they see that you're a man of integrity and that you're trying to be a better man today than you were yesterday. But if you're just like, yeah, you'll get it when you get it, dude. Like then I don't know. To me, it just boggles my mind that there are creators that are just like, no, man, this will take 5 years. But then that's the other thing is they set the expectation that it's going to be like this mind-blowing
Grandiose book. Yeah.
Watchmen sort of thing. And the vast majority of the time, when you get the book, you're like, was this worth like 3, 4 years? I like, it's fine, I guess, but like, I don't know. I was talking to an artist recently, and so when I was growing up, I like Guns N' Roses, 80s or whatever. So Axl Rose, they broke up, and he was going to come out with this album called Chinese Democracy. And it was always rumored that this album took like 12, 13, 14 years to come out. And they were like, no, it's going to be great, man. It's going to be the greatest album. So it finally comes out. I listened to it, and I was like, hey, this is like okay, but not 14 years worth. I don't understand. So that's what happens with indie comics. And when you call people out on that and be like, dude, you're acting like you're some genius above everybody else, and it's not. You're not really as cool or as smart as you think you are. And that makes people mad when you say that to them.
Yeah, I just would assume, obviously, that since someone is a creative, they want to make sure that they get their readers the product that they ordered and bought from them in a timely manner. It's the same thing with, I'll use Amazon for example for anyone. So when your Amazon order is at least literally maybe a couple hours late, maybe a day late, you're already raging out. You're already going, where's my package? Is it stolen? Whatever. You're already freaking out. Just like that. Keep in mind, just for a big company like Amazon, who's mastered how to ship things to people with a lot of the workers that they have, people are mad if the product is literally a day late, just a day. And keep in mind, a comic book, I would assume, is a much more easier process to do than shipping out 10 million freaking orders a day with all the different stores, distribution warehouses they have, right? Then you must also consider the fact that if we're competing in a lot of this stuff now when it comes to comic books, if your book doesn't come out in a timely manner, they'll just forget you exist. A lot of people ask, like, why do certain campaigns do worse with each one? Well, there's a lot of different factors. Well, first of all, most people are always going to buy into number ones. That's just comic books in general. Everyone is going to buy into a number one of anything. But if someone eventually does end up reading that book, because I'll be honest here, I don't think a lot of people read the books anyway. I think they just say they do without actually doing it. But if they do, they probably don't want to hurt that creator's feelings because there's some personal relationship here as far as like different from how the mainstream works. Like the reason why I could maybe shit on Gail Simone. I've never met Gail Simone, so I have no personal connection to her. I think this kind of the scene for us comic wise is very connected to each other. So when you shit on someone, even though the person says they don't take it personally, they do. They always do. You can tell. But it's one of those things where now we're at a point where readers that do end up getting the books, they don't read them, and because they're fearing of like, hey, I might not like this, I don't want to talk about it with that person, or they just don't get the books because they're under this mystical idea, like you said, they're waiting for Watchmen. And let's be honest, a lot of these books come out are just not good. It just is what it is sometimes for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's the thing is if you're a first-time creator, so there's a learning curve in all of this as well, and people will cut you slack for that, and they're like, okay, well, is he in this for the long haul? That's the other thing is like there's these one and done type people where they have these dreams of being the indie, and that's the thing is a lot of people go into it with the wrong mindset. They like think that they're going to be like they're going to drop the book. It's going to be the greatest thing ever. They're going to be famous. They're going to make Hollywood's going to come in for them or whatever. They're going to be YouTube famous. Who knows? And it's like you're going into this with the wrong motivations, dude. Like you really, because putting out indie comics on a regular basis at a certain quality, like a decent quality level, it's actually really hard and stressful to a certain extent. So if you're going into it thinking like, I'm going to strike it rich. You're just like, there's many better ways to make money if you only want to make money. And if you only care about attention, there's other ways to get attention. So you really should just go into it for the love of the craft of storytelling and the love of art. And because that will keep you going over the long haul. But if you just think that you're just trying to get a Hollywood option or something, no, that is the vast majority of people that are doing these books. That's not going to happen. So, you just got to get your priorities straight first. But I could go on in a million different.
No, I wanted to actually tackle on that too. I'm glad you brought it up because a lot of people think just because they're getting into this, they're going to make a whole lot of money. It's like, guys, fun fact, crazy. Marvel and DC don't make a lot of money doing comics books, actually. If the big dogs aren't making a whole ton of money doing this, well, the little guy is literally just getting the scraps. I kind of said this analogy in some shows a while ago where you have like the mainstream people that like Marvel, DC, Image, Dark Horse, Boom Studio, all those guys. Then you have actually a tier of indie publishers under them, like Dynamite. There's like Antarctic Press. That you guys would probably be under that. Rippaverse is probably under that. There's like indies even under mainstream people that are like in the industry. Like Image Comics releases indie books literally weekly. Shit you've never heard of right now, still to this day. So when you're an indie comic book creator, people think like they're just competing with Marvel and DC. Well, you're not really doing that. That's not happening. What's happening is that you're actually competing essentially with all the indies on your level because there's other underknown indies as well. There's Mad Cave, people like them, right? They're pumping out books. Or Scout Comics. There was that. I think it was them, right? But they got kicked out of Diamond before Diamond went full banker because they were pushing out product late. Getting it into their catalog or whatever. It's just I don't know. People need to understand, like what you guys have over there. Just pump out a good product as good as you can. But the audience gets to decide what they spend their money on. A lot of people think, oh, I made this great book, and why is no one spending money on my book? It's like, well, first of all, there's a ton of competition. Second of all, it could be not that good, or it's just given the fact that the audience maybe just didn't like it.
Right.
It's many factors.
You can do everything right, and you can make actually a solid book, but for whatever reason, the audience decides they're not for it, or it came out at the wrong time. Something else was blowing up that sucked all the oxygen out of the room, and everyone was focused on that. Now there's video games. There's so many things vying for people's attention that to go to comic, like when I grew up in the early 80s, comic, it was a whole different, didn't have the internet, you didn't have streaming services and all of that. And so comics were, you didn't even have a different cinematic universes with comic book characters that people could like go through those libraries and watch. So what you have to kind of do, and again, I'm aging myself, but I was talking to a friend about this. It's like when REM, before they blew up as a band in the 80s or whatever, they were going around the country just driving in their van to like small venues all over the place, and nobody knew who they were. And then all of a sudden they blow up. They're on David Letterman or whatever back in the day. And then people are like, you're an overnight success. And you're like, actually, no, I had to grind it out in obscurity around the country at like bars and small shows. And then you like slowly build your following. And in my mind, indie comics is a lot like that. Is like, you have to be all in and committed, and then you have to be doing your best work, and you have to just keep grinding it out. And then over time, as you keep putting out that library, now when people like look at Soul Finder, there's 4 books and there's 2 short stories.
Yeah.
And before it was like maybe they'll take a chance on 1 book, but now they can see reviews for 4 different books. They could see that, so like they're buying bundles of everything all at once, and so it starts to like build on each other. There's a cascading effect that happens, and it only gets there if you're willing to like have a long view of everything and be like, nah, dude, I'm in this for a decade. No matter what happens, good or bad, I am just going to keep plowing forward and trying to be better every single time and see what happens.
I told people this, it always comes down to drive, consistency, and ambition. Even when it comes to like content creation, a lot of people, it's very similar to a certain extent. Like you have people that'll go like, well, I'm not seeing the results, but my stuff's so good. It's like, well, you got to keep pushing through that. Guys, recently, I just put out a video that was this insanely well edited, hour-long video talking about how bad The Last Jedi was. It did pretty okay. Did all right. Did I get mad that it didn't do that bad? No. I know that, hey, some you do very good on, some videos you don't do very good on. I did a video on my comic book channel talking about how Mark Waid is a moron. That popped out pretty hard. You have to just keep trying. That's really all you have to do. If you let, like, as a man, I think if you let one hurdle stop you, I think you're not really cut off for anything. If you let one single hurdle stop you like this, my God, imagine how you are in the real world. If you let a little hurdle like this stop you, You're essentially in a digital ocean, and every time you put out a product, whether it's a YouTube video or it's a comic book or whatever it is, you're essentially putting it in the bottle and throwing it out there from your little island. And if you throw one tiny bottle out into the ocean, what are the chances that someone's gonna get it and they're gonna spread the word? But if you just keep throwing bottles, over and over and over and over and over again, that's how you're going to do it. You can't, like you said, you can't really get discouraged if you put out a comic and it's not doing gangbusters right out the gates. It's just like, no, dude, well, if you really believe in yourself and you're being objective about your talent, you're not being delusional, and you are improving and you just keep going forward, like, time will reward you if you are being honest with yourself and you are improving, and if you're legitimately putting out a good product. Over time, people that do that, they tend to be rewarded for it. Before we get talking about Soul Finder, you guys, and you yourself, you've met Eric July, right?
I have not met him in person. That would be cool to do one day. But
being a black guy, crazy.
We've interacted on X back and forth in messages over the past year and a half or so.
Mm-hmm. It seems to be you guys are aligned with, like, just delivering for the customers, which is good because that should be the goal. Customers should be the priority to make them happy, because whether they like you or don't like you, they are investing their money into you. And it's weird to see people just dismiss a customer being like, well, they'll just get it when they get it. So that means if someone has that attitude, I have to back another book then, I'll just keep my money then at that point. That's what most people are going to start thinking,
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things. Well, one, Eric's also in Texas, Iconics in Texas. Yeah. And over time, I was like, all right, this guy, he's getting out books, multiple books. He has all, like, if it's a cookbook or whatever, he's got the recipe for success. When you first make your cookie batch or whatever it is, maybe the first batch isn't quite there what you wanted yet, but you basically, you're like, all right, I have all the material, the raw material here to make something really cool. And so he was getting the books out. He was hiring, I was like, he's hiring professional writers and professional artists. He's looking for like new people that are on board with what he's trying to do. He's learning from mistakes and I don't know, just constantly getting better. So I was like, this guy is on the right trajectory. And I was looking and I'm like, why people are being like really unfair towards like he did not come from the industry. He puts out a book and they're acting as if because it's not, you know, name your the greatest Marvel book of all time or whatever it is that, and you're acting like because it's not some sort of Stan Lee, Steve Ditko-esque sort of thing right from the start, then well, no, we want nothing to do with that guy. And you're just like, but can you see the bigger picture? Can you see what he's doing and where he's going? Can you connect the dots and see a potential future where he's doing really cool things for indie comics and lighting a fire? And it was just really annoying to me because I was like, he's in many respects on the same page as Iconic. And I'm seeing a similar sentiment from people that are not being charitable towards the overall vision and the overall blueprint.
People are very short-sighted. I think that's what it really is. A lot of average people with no actual drive and ambition don't see things for the long haul. They only see things right in front of them, like as a day-to-day thing. And you have people that were bitching about the freaking price of the books. Guys, comic books cost a lot of money. I know some people only think there are floppies that come out. No, omnibuses come out, compendiums come out, trade paperbacks come out constantly. Just being just annoying about every little thing. It's like, okay, if you really don't like it that much, you know, you don't have to buy it. You don't have to buy it. You don't have to interact with the company. Block Twitter accounts if you need to, but they don't. They have to just weirdly obsess with comic books they're not buying because they don't like the person behind them. I don't get it, you know?
Yeah, and to me, the other thing, and hopefully it's, well, it'll probably annoy some people, but so Eric is a true indie. And the guys at Iconic, like, you know, there are pros like Eric Canetti did come in, but me and Tim and the Kindred Heavens, these are true indie creators that are trying to build these companies. And sometimes I see people that they claim that they care about indies, but it's like, actually, it seems like you really only care about pros that are putting out books outside of Marvel and DC, which is fine. But you really are threatened or there's some sort of strange apprehension about actual indies that are putting out books that are equal to or better to people that have been in the mainstream industry for decades. And I think a lot of what's going on with Eric July is there's a bitterness and an envy that a guy that had never stepped in the one foot in DC offices and Marvel offices has been able to do things that their creators that left the industry have not been able to do, or they have a very, very tough time doing it. And he makes it look a lot easier than it really is. Cause it actually is hard, but he's making a lot of logistical things, getting out the volume that he gets out as smoothly as he does. I'm like, even if you don't like this guy, can you at least acknowledge that his logistical prowess in terms of delivering books is better than you? And maybe you could learn something from the guy instead of just dumping on him all of the time. And so just saying that,
it's like everything he does, people just have an issue with everything. He could tweet like, hey, I have enough money to cure cancer. Someone would find a problem with that. Just unnecessarily irrational hating, like Trump derangement syndrome with some of these people, honestly.
Right. And when you're putting someone under a microscope that
hard.
Again, this is a guy, he's never been in the industry. He's doing this, and you're putting him under this crazy micron, whatever, super microscope that you are not applying to people that brag on a regular basis about their tenure and their experience in the industry. And I'm like, why is there this double standard? There seems to be, you know, and in a way, it's actually good because pressure builds diamonds sort of thing. And so it's making him better because he's got the right personality. In my mind, how do I say it? It's annoying when you get put under the microscope, but especially if there's like a hypocrisy to it. But at the
Yeah.
same time, you're like, okay, well, I got the personality. You want to put me under the microscope? I'm gonna just keep getting better and better
Yeah.
and better. So thank you for being unfair towards me, because I'm going to use this as fuel to further embarrass you when I continue to get better and better each year.
It's also crazy the fact that someone could have this level of haters. And I get he comes from a different kind of background than comic books too, because he had a comic book background as well, but it's like the music stuff he also he was involved
Right.
in. I always say this to people, sometimes on Twitter. Sometimes some days I just ignore them. Some days I like to get in the mud and fight a little bit. Why are you channeling this much hatred for a indie comic book creator, as you said? So someone whose impact on the market is going to be pretty much null and void, considering the fact of, you know, the actual name brand and everything involved. He's still brand new. He only started in 2022 in July, back in that year. You know, Marvel and DC, who've been doing insanely not good things for years, why aren't you channeling this level of hatred for them? They clearly would have more of an impact on comic books than Eric would, or any indie really. They have that much big of an impact on people. They do when it comes to comic books, but it's weirdly channeled. I don't get it. Like, Marvel and DC do very bad things constantly. You know, there's years we don't really do anything that bad, but I don't understand why are they focused on taking down an indie person who, in their minds, is not good. The books are trash. So if all that stuff is true, for argument's sake, if all that stuff is true, is what you guys say, then he has no impact. Then nothing he'll do will matter. Okay, Marvel and DC are the person you should be looking at, but they don't, because they are secretly, I think, shills. Honestly, they don't want to obviously shit on Marvel and DC in that way like he used to, because they want to have that bridge to open, like, okay, I'm on your side, I'll shit on him for you. It's like, why would you sacrifice your integrity like that? And they don't even think Marvel and DC books are good, because they don't buy them either or read them, so they must not think they're good either, because they'll be like, well, Marvel and DC is doing this, you guys don't even read those books. I'm like, hear your opinion on some books you haven't read. You know, it's crazy how people will act. You know, comic books make people go literally insane. It's actually mind-blowing.
Yeah, I just think that with some of the readers, there's a starstruck mentality where YouTube allows people to be in touch in ways that you wouldn't have been able to years ago. And so you could interact immediately via the chat or whatever it is, or on Twitter and DMs and all of that. And so I think a lot of people are just starstruck, and they will apologize for anything that the industry pro does. They claim to be pro indie, but they're really just about pros giving them attention. And then with the pros, that's interesting to me. Some of the pros that put Eric under scrutiny, and even iconic to some extent, but it's really Eric. It's like, all right, well, you came from Marvel and DC, and you want to spend an inordinate amount of time on Eric. It almost seems like you want to like leave the door cracked just a little bit, just in case there's a chance you could go back one day. You don't want to burn bridges or something like that, where you're like, oh, well, you know, it's easy. If I just lob bombs at Eric July all day, that's different than lobbing bombs at the editors over at Marvel or the editors at DC. And I can just kind of like, in a superficial way, be like, yeah, DC and Marvel, they're not doing very good things. Eric July sucks or whatever. And that way, if they want to ever like tiptoe back and see if they could work back into the industry, then they didn't burn that bridge. I don't know that. I'm not 100% sure, but like I said, the prioritizing Eric July and going after him when, like you said, there's bigger fish to fry in terms of cultural impact right now, it's very bizarre to me.
So your comic book series, Soul Finder, what was the inspiration for that, honestly? Because you're the writer, right? You're not the artist.
Right. So I'm the writer creator, and so a number of things. I have always loved creative writing. I always loved comic books. Like I said, I went to the University of Southern California. I was an English major there. Debated becoming an English teacher at one point in time. But I always loved creative writing. And even in high school and middle school, I was in, they had like a feeder program when I was in middle school. They picked a couple kids that they thought were creative for whatever reason, and they would literally ship us from the middle school to the high school for like a couple hours a day, and we would like learn about the craft of storytelling. So my entire life I loved storytelling and writing. But then, like I said, I ended up working for a newspaper and still writing, but not the kind of writing that I truly loved. And so then when I met Timothy Lim years ago, and we were talking about the evolution of the industry, or it's actually devolving in many ways, and I met him, and actually we got along really well in terms of faith. We're both practicing Catholics, and our politics are on the same page as well. But one time we were talking, and I was explaining to him this idea that would eventually become Soul Finder, and he's like, "Oh man, when I was a kid, there was like a GI Joe contest, make your own GI Joe, and I thought it'd be cool if there was a Catholic priest who was the counter to Cobra's occultist sort of stuff." And so then I was just like, "Yeah, I feel like we should like work together." And he's like, "Yeah, let's do it, man. Like write up a script and we'll work together." And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he's like, yeah, do it." So I was like, "All right, if you tell me, I will do this." And he's like, "Nope, do it." I wrote the script. And then Tim and Mark were on a business sort of like fun vacation in Orlando back in, what is this, 2018 now? And I flew down to Orlando and I met them and I gave them the script and they read it. And then while we were waiting in line for all the rides, we would just like talk about the script. And then soon after that, Tim ended up doing Soul Finder Demons Match.
So what have you learned from the first book you did in your series versus now where you're at? Because now you're on 4 books. You're going to be on 4 books eventually. Are you on 4 books?
It's the 5th book is actually, if all goes well, will be out this year. At least the soft cover. And then I'll shoot for the hardcover, but it all depends. I guess I'm meeting Matt Weldon this weekend, and so I'm going to talk to him and sort all that out. But I think we're on track for Volume 5 coming out later this year, hopefully before Bell County Comic Con. A lot of moving parts, and then on track for Volume 6 for next year. So, but in terms of what I've learned since the first book, like I said, totally different kind of writing, from even just prose or poetry or all the different kind of writing I did as a kid. Writing for comics, you're the director, you're the cinematographer. You got to figure out, the page breaks when you turn. Like you want the panel on the page right before the page turn. You want to have anticipation for the person, and it's got to be like setting up something cool for the page turn. So you got to figure that out. And then each page is its own kind of like mini story as well. So just the writing for comics is interesting. And again, there's a learning curve with that. And then because it's a collaborative effort, the more that you work with the same artist over and over again, it kind of takes you a little while to be like, okay, this is how this guy works. This is how he works best. He knows how I work best. And we could develop our own sort of language. Like, what do you think here and there? Blah, 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 blah. And so having worked with Matt over and over and over again, it like starts to just become smoother as time goes on. But there are little things. I was so focused on the writing on Demons Match that I didn't even do like a double page spread for Tim. There was a splash page on the first, the very first page, but there's like little artistic things that I didn't think of on the first book that now when I have all sorts of stuff in my mind as I'm writing the new book. So I'm like, okay, the artist can do this. I know he's cool if I, challenge him here, if I could try and push him out of his comfort zone there. I could take a chance here. And so it's just a matter of becoming more comfortable as the years go by. And especially working with the same creative teams over and over again.
So what's really crazy, there's this tweet you always put out pretty routinely throughout the years, which is you yourself, as you mentioned earlier in the show as well, you didn't come from a mainstream background or anything. And you were taught and you were told by several comic book pros that you have to do things this exact way and all this structure that you have to do. But turns out you didn't do any of that. Fun fact. And you actually just paved your own way and you did it. So what made you not want to listen to any of that? Did you just not think it was true? Did you have a sixth sense about like, it's not possible for me to do all those things? Or you just heard it and you were like, okay, I could do that, but then, it's bullshit.
So in my mind, how do I say this? There are people within indie comics and especially pros that they think, a lot of times people think, okay, because I was an artist or because I was a writer, then and maybe they're very good. Maybe they're a creative genius. Who knows? Maybe they're just very talented artist or very talented writer. But then they think that carries on over into marketing or accounting or like time management and all sorts of other elements of the creative process and the printing process that has nothing to do with their skill set. And so in my mind, it's like, all right, if you have good advice, I will listen to it. I'll listen to everything you have to say, but then I'm going to do my own research. And if I think that you're just off base, then I will ignore that. And so what happens is you have individuals that think that they are an authority. Because they're an authority in one field, it carries on over to everything. And they get really upset if you don't just take everything they say as gospel. And early on, one of the things that I was saying in 2017, 2018, as this particular circle of creators was getting together, was like, fulfillment and distribution is going to be a problem. If you want to do this, you can't screw over the backers. Again, coming from a consumer standpoint, the reader is in my heart. I was like, do not burn the bridges with your own backers. And if you, and in order to keep momentum going, you can't just be like scattershot, like, oh, I'll come out with a book now, and then maybe it'll be a year, and then maybe 3 years, and then maybe 4 years, and people never know like what's going on. I can't get a beat on like what is going on with the series. Like, you need consistency, you need reliability, you need to bring down the price point, or at least have multiple price points where, like, okay, some people, they want a hardcover with like gold gilded pages and it's more expensive. Some people don't give a rip about a hardcover, they just want a soft cover. So give people different price options as well. And then you get into it where there's creators where like they're all about, no, I care about money. Money is my priority. I want to make as much money as fast as possible. So you start butting heads in terms of the philosophies. And within indie comics, there's people that they essentially want to be neo gatekeepers. They came from the industry and now they're in indies and they want to be the neo gatekeepers. And I was like, no, you are essentially irrelevant to my long-term success. Like, I'll listen to you where it makes sense, but I'm not where it doesn't make sense for me and my goals and my definition of success, which is different from somebody else's. They can have whatever definition of success they want. They want to make $1 million, great. I don't want to, like, $1 million is nice, but I really just want to make a book that people say the storytelling is solid and the art is beautiful. And this is something that I could pick up 10 years from now and pull it off my shelf or whatever. And I can give it to my kid, or I could give it to my grandkid and feel comfortable that they will learn, there's good lessons that will be imparted to them. That's what I care about. And again, other people care about money. They care about Hollywood options and coming up with concepts where, like, no, man, this is the concept. As soon as the right producer hears it, Hollywood's going to be banging on my door. I don't really care about that. It's nice if it happens, but that's not what I'm focused on.
Yeah. I also think people have to understand that when it comes to just indie comic book creators in general, what you should focus on is what you said, creating a product or a story that makes someone remember that you exist. Because I said before, given funds and production and everything, and people's schedules and artists and lettering and all that stuff, right? You want to make sure your story is good first and foremost, because that'll be what keeps them coming back. Like, for most indie comic book arts, usually always pretty fine. People usually spend the most money on the artist and the printing of the book. So the art's usually never the problem. It's mostly the fact that someone's writing a story that sounds, man, people say the CW is bad. They're writing less than good CW shows. We're talking like bad CW shows. Some of these books are actually written like, So I think people need to humble themselves and go like, okay, I'm not good. How do I become good? Maybe take cues from watching shows like the CW shows or any decent media you like to kind of understand the fact that there's so much comic books coming out. If you do not stand out in any way memorable, your second campaign, third campaign just might be doing that well, because there's a good chance people read it. They just probably just didn't think it was that interesting enough to continue buying the books though, and keep in mind, as you said before, the wait time. It's like, if you're already waiting a year and you already didn't care for that story, it's like, why would you invest it again? Just makes no sense from a consumer point of view. you know?
And that's another issue that you get into the writers versus artists. So where
Hmm.
I've butted head over the years is with artists, not the artists that I work with, obviously, but a lot of artists, they actually denigrate writers and they look down on writers, and they're just like, anybody could write. I could write a script in 24, 48 hours. And so from my point of view, I'm like, yes, you know English, you could write, you know how to type, that's great. Anybody could write a story in 24 hours, 48 hours. It doesn't mean it's a good story. It doesn't mean it's a
Twilight
great.
exists, you know? The
Yeah.
lady who created Twilight is trash. Book is terrible. Books are
So
awful.
there's this bias where many times artists, they think that because they can technically write or come up with a story, that the craft of storytelling is easy. And you're like, actually, no. Writing a good or great story is actually hard. Writing something that's somebody will remember for the rest of their life is really hard. Writing something where someone's going to ponder it long after, it's like days later, they're going to think about a certain scene. They're going to pass a cathedral or a church, and they think of Soul Finder, and they think a certain scene, and then like how it pertains to their life. If your goal is to get something that plants a seed in somebody's head that bears good fruit decades down the line, that's actually really hard to do. But if you want to just give people like bubble gum where they chew it for a little bit and then they forget it and they throw it out, like anybody, yeah, anybody can do the juicy fruit version of indie comics.
Mhm.
But if you want something that's gonna, again, mature over time in their brain, and it's actually going to leave good impressions on them and mold them into better men and women, that's very, very difficult.
So that's why I always kind of go back and forth on it too. I always say it like this: great art gets you in the door. Because when someone is going to go, let's say your book was in a comic book store, the first thing they're going to notice is the art, because
Right.
they haven't opened the book. They don't know how good your writing is. Art gets you in the door, but I think good writing makes the long time reader, actually. So essentially, it's weird. Like, I would say it's, if we're going by out of 100, probably 60-40, say 60 art, 40% writing, but it has to be a good combination of it, because there's plenty of comic books I've read where the art carries most of the book, but the writing is pretty meh. It's pretty okay at best,
Right.
But after you read it, you're like, oh man, great art, but don't think I'll be picking that up anytime soon again.
Yeah, and there's certain, how do I say it, iconic poses or whatever. Name the superhero, whether it's Spider-Man swinging across New York City, or Batman on a gargoyle, or whatever it is, Superman running out of a phone booth, who knows. Typically, yes, how do I say, those images in a vacuum will not be memorable. The reason why people remember certain images is, Spider-Man on a bridge, it's because there was a story connected to it. The love of his life was thrown off a bridge and she died and she broke her neck or whatever. It's like, you need to actually have a story that resonates with people on a deeper level for them to remember and tie it to the image. The image, a cool image is just something that's cool and people are like, oh, wow, that's nice. And then they like move on to the next thing. But it's like you said, the story is what is implanted in people's brains, and that's what they connect it to their struggles and the crosses that they bear and all the toils that they have gone through over the life. That's what really ties it to their heart.
The other thing I'll bring up is, do you yourself have a YouTube channel, or are you going to be making like content surrounding your comic book series at all, or are you just going to be just the guy that just makes the comic books actually?
So I used to do YouTube videos on a regular basis, but this was years ago. This is 2017, 2018. And then as I started to get into Soul Finder, it became a thing. So initially I was into like cultural commentary. And then many years ago, I even had a blog, and Dan Slott hated my guts because I was reviewing Spider-Man and his stuff. And so once I started getting into the books, I was just like, most of my time is, how do I say it? If you want to keep honing your craft and you want to get better, and that starts to consume all of your time, and you really don't have time for all this other stuff. So I do live stream just to like say hello to people, give them updates on iconic comics and my books and the other creators. But I haven't really done any videos on cultural commentary in a long, long time. So I suppose theoretically I could start doing videos again sometime, but it would be sort of the quote unquote evergreen content where
Yeah.
it's something of substance that it's just broad enough and deep enough where it's like, okay, this is something that's if somebody ran across it 5 years from now, it would still be relevant. I don't want to just do the day-to-day comic book drama at Marvel or DC or Captain America 4, like whatever. That's the stuff I did used to do that stuff. And that I think that there is value, a certain value in that if you do it correctly. But as a creator, if I'm doing Soul Finder, I don't have time to do the stuff that I used to do.
Yeah, because you actually function under the mindset of like, hey, I'm gonna just be the comic book guy who might at some point do some YouTube on the side,
Right.
It is a balance to a lot of that stuff too. Like, guys, that's the reason why Eric has like editors for his content, because sitting there editing while trying to run an entire business is just, there's a reason why people hire other people to do jobs. It creates a job economy. Actually, people are doing jobs that the person just can't do or doesn't have the time to do.
So years ago, when I was doing regular videos, it would take me I would basically think for an hour about what I wanted to do. Then I would write it out, and then that would take, a while. Then I would have to find the images that I want to sync up with, what I'm talking about. And then I would have to edit it. And so by the time all that's over, all of a sudden you've spent 4, 5, 6, 7 hours on one video. And these days, you're just like, okay, where's that 7 or 8 hours best spent? Is it on this video or is it on something related to Soul Finder? And like you said with Eric, there's a transition that needs to occur once you could either become a YouTuber who happens to sometimes do comic books, or you can be a comic book creator who sometimes does YouTube, but you really can't be both simultaneously. It's you would have to be like an Elon Musk type character where you can just juggle 10,000 things at the same time, but most people cannot do that.
The other thing to bring up is, how invested have you been into like movies and TV recently? Because I know you're mostly focused on comics. Have you been watching any movies or TV shows, or you pretty much just been kind of like just done with that for a while?
No, I don't. The last show that I even watched was the last season of Stranger Things, which was years ago. So I don't even watch any television. I barely watch any movies. I did watch. So when I went down to Bell County Comic Con last year, Deadpool came out, and I saw Deadpool with Eric Canetti, and like a midnight show or close to it. But for the most part, most of my time is spent researching and reading books that are linked to Soul Finder stories that I want to tell, physical fitness type stuff, and writing and promoting the books, and but not so much the television shows these days. I just don't have time for it.
Also, since you said you're married, I know it's gonna be an interesting conversation to go to this point. A lot of people, aren't married nowadays. They think it's not a good investment, or they don't find a good partner. Why do you think guys are having trouble eventually getting married outside of the normal conventions that are usually always a factor?
Yeah, I mean, you could go many different directions with that.
Guys are sipping too hard, you think? OnlyFans has ruined their brains?
Well, I do think that, like I said, when I was growing up, you were going outside and you were meeting people face to face, and you were doing literally, you didn't have the internet. So you were meeting other children in other neighborhoods. You were getting into adventures with them. You were playing baseball and football, and all the kids were together. And again, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm old or whatever, but with the internet, it seems like people are almost in a little bubble, and they're not meeting people face to face that like they used to. And so I mean, I think probably just the social media culture and people that are like always on their phones. Again, I'm aging myself here, but when I was growing up, you literally would go to the mall and you would like meet total strangers, like other kids at the mall, and then suddenly you would strike up friendships like arcades. Like you were like physically next to like other people. And I don't know, probably on some level, I don't want to say social media was a mistake, but I feel like I wish people could return to like my youth in some respect, where you were just outside for like 6-7 hours at a time, meeting people.
Yeah, that's the thing is back in the day before the internet blew up the way it did, we had a chance to like, go outside and meet people. You have to meet people. That was just the way you interacted, Now it's so easy to just talk to someone online and just get to know them. I think that
Right.
removing that social aspect really did hurt a lot of people. I mean, man, back when I started going back outside, I was like, man, this feels interesting. There's grass, there's sunlight. Oh my God, feels crazy out here. There's women. Like, holy shit.
No, and that's why I actually like doing the shows. I'll be at Anime Sunika, Bell County Comic Con. There's another show I might do later this year. I like physically meeting readers and shaking their hands and thanking them in person. And it's just a completely different experience. Like, it's cool that like, you and I couldn't have this conversation many years ago before the internet existed. But at the same time, there is kind of like you were saying, where it's different to actually physically have a book. I feel like there's a benefit that you get from meeting somebody face to face that you just do not get if it's just looking at them on a screen.
Yeah, speaking of the last thing we'll cover here, anime. Since you're going to an anime Comic Con, I've seen some videos. Are anime people at these cons weird? Or do they like talk in anime voices and shit? They Naruto speed run.
So the thing is so I will be at Anime Sunika, but I'm only going to be helping at the booth because Soul Finder is actually more of a Western style comic. But at some of the shows that I've been to, they are more anime centric. And I don't know. Maybe it's just growing up with comics and that sort of culture. Like, I don't really think of people as doing like strange, like if somebody's in cosplay or whatever, it like almost feels natural to me. So I'm not probably the fairest judge of whether somebody is being weird or not at a show. But most people I've ever run into, they're very, very friendly. And I've just had a great time doing the shows. And even though it's exhausting, like on your body traveling and getting on planes and driving in cars for hours and you feel like you're beat up, I've just had nothing but good experiences speaking with the people that show up to the booths.
Okay. So do you have like favorite animes that you've watched throughout the years?
I'm not really a big my wife is actually really big into anime, but like when I was growing up, there was stuff like Doom Megalopolis and things like that. So like those are the things that I grew up with, but then I didn't follow up with it. So Tim and Mark are more the anime manga inspired guys. Like
you chose to live in the real world. You weren't like us weebs. You chose to get a wife and have some kids. Dang it, man.
No, I mean, like I said, if my wife were next to me right now and you were like, name 50 different anime mangas that you like, she would just rattle them off like, here and there. And I did actually, this is like, more like manga or whatever, but I did check out, was it Spy Family? And I did like that. That was pretty cool. But in terms of just speaking off on anime, like again, you were like, Doug's if he tries, he's gonna be a poser, man. So I don't want to be a poser.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, God, anime is an interesting place, and you don't want to get into that. It's full of weirdos. Anime people are foam at the mouth too. They just, God, Lord, nerds are weird, but it's all part of the culture, because back in the day, this was weirdly not accepted by a lot of people. Still, kind of really isn't, because there's a lot of bad actors that have infiltrated in a lot of things and made things worse. So, last few things, Ashley, man, before we head out of here is, do you have anything planned coming up in 2025 you want to let the audience know about?
So 2025 is Soul Finder Volume 5, if all goes well. And again, hopefully that'll be out before Bell County Comic Con in August. If not, it should be out this year for sure. and I will be promoting them on YouTube, on X, on Instagram, my old school blog every once in a while. And basically all you have to do is search Douglas Ernst and you'll find my account. They're all basically my name and then the account. And if you see a priest on there or some sort of priest battling a demon, that's probably me.
Last thing is, do you have any shout outs you want to get to anyone in particular and anything else you want to say before we head out?
Yeah, I just want people to check out Iconic Comics, and there's a whole slew of creators there, whether it's Timothy Liam, Mark Pellegrini, Sven Alejandro, Matt Weldon, Bill Williams, Scott and Bryce from Kindred Heavens, Eric from Arc Athena. Hopefully I didn't miss anybody, but just check out Iconic Comics. Check out everybody out on there. And then again, thank you for having me. Thanks for this discussion. Really appreciated it.
Yeah. It's great to finally get this going. It's a lot of indie comic book stuff that people talk about, but it's always fun, always dive into all the reasons why a certain book or how things are made from a creator point of view. So thank you guys for checking out this episode of the MSK Show.